So in my last video, I was actually talking about how Unreal Engine might be killing video games, and there is a lot of videos on this topic, and I think the hatred towards Unreal Engine is kind of justified and also kind of wrong. The reason why I said that it is justified is because Unreal Engine is definitely moving towards animation and visual production, and they're trying to push their visual quality as much as they can, which is in turn making the hardware requirements for video games higher. But at the same time, some part of the problem is actually development of the games on Unreal Engine. And I think that developers are not only just not properly learning Unreal Engine, but they are also choosing Unreal Engine for no reason. They don't have to develop games on Unreal Engine. And so I'm making this video to actually compare the other engine that we can actually use to develop games on, and that is Unity. So without any further ado, let's compare these two engines and see which one might just be better. So the very first point that we need to talk about in case of Unreal and Unity is the fact that Unreal in general has a much better visual quality, and this is a no-brainer, right? That visual quality is better in Unreal Engine. And if you absolutely have to make a high graphics video game, then actually you are better off using Unreal Engine, because Unreal Engine is more optimized towards achieving those higher graphics video games. You know, if you have to make a high graphic video game or high visual quality, then Unreal is actually more optimized, because if you make the same amount of visual fidelity in Unity, you will actually have to use a lot more assets, a lot more add-ons, and that in turn will make the load on your hardware just as much, or if not higher. So I think in terms of visual quality, I do think that Unreal is still a better option. With that said, there are some incredible games that are developed on Unity that look really good and that are performing just as good. So it really boils down to which software is really better in terms of compatibility. And I think that this is where Unity's biggest advantage is. In case of scalability of how you can tweak the game to be compatible or optimized for different hardwares, I think that is where Unity wins. In case of Unity, you can make games literally for mobile phone hardware, and that is incredible. I mean, you can develop mobile games on Unreal as well, but they're not going to be nearly as optimized. The thing is that in case of Unity, you can actually achieve more stylistic look in video games, and if anything, we have seen in recent times that stylized games such as Lethal Company or Fears to Fathom or Repo, these games are blowing up. They are really good games and they don't have high quality graphics. What I think is that higher quality graphics are just becoming boring. And so those companies or those developers who are using Unreal Engine just to make a high quality or high graphic game because they think that is going to make their game more popular or more likable, I think that's a wrong mentality. What I think is that developers need to focus on how good the gameplay and the actual story of the game is, because I think that will play a bigger role in the success of their game. So in terms of compatibility, I will have to definitely give this to Unity. Now, learning curve is another important point that we can talk about, but in case of Unity, I actually think that Unity is a little more beginner friendly. Now, a lot of people who hate Unreal Engine have this very common point that Unreal Engine is actually making the development of games easier. That's kind of not true, because in Unreal, while yes, the actual part of development isn't that hard, it is also true that Unreal makes everything in the development pipeline to be more visual, such as the blueprints or the node setup. So you don't actually have to code something, but that also make the whole process tedious. Like if you try to even make one texture and you want to animate that texture or whatnot, the whole node setup can become really tedious and it's quite hard to learn. So it's not as easy as people really think about it. On the other hand, Unity is actually kind of beginner friendly, because the actual interface of learning Unity is actually more easy. And if anything, you will actually find better tutorials of how to develop games on Unity, because let's be honest here, Unreal doesn't have really good tutorials. So in case of actual learning curve, I think both of those softwares are really good. But I think the common sentiment that Unreal is easier to learn is actually wrong. I think both of these softwares come with their own challenges of learning. But at the same time, I do think that Unity is kind of underrated. It is actually kind of just as easy to learn as Unreal, if not easier. So in terms of learning curve, I will actually give this point to both of these engines. Now when we talk about their marketplace and the availability of assets, well, I'm gonna be honest here, and I have used both Unity and Unreal. Both of them have really good marketplaces, and I think that's the strongest point of these two engines. These two game engines, when we talk about Unity's Unity market and then we talk about Unreal's Fab Store, both of these stores actually have really good assets, really good world building kits. And I think this is where both of these engines actually shine. These engines, both of them actually have really good stores and marketplaces. You don't have to model everything in your game. You can just kit bash a lot of assets and then use them in your video game. And a lot of these assets, especially ones on the Unreal's Fab Store, are so high quality that you just need to place them in your video game and they're gonna work. With that said, that is exactly the same difference between the actual two engines. As Unreal Engine is higher in quality and also hardware demanding, the same thing applies to its store. The Fab Store actually has assets that are very high poly and higher in texture quality. Whereas on the store of Unity, you will actually find stylized assets as well. So you don't just have to go with the highest quality asset, or because you don't have any other option than using high quality assets. Unity actually has stylized assets or low poly assets, and that is really good. And yes, there are new assets being added to both of the stores, but I think both the stores are really incredible. I think either of them can be used alternatively, and you can use assets of either of the stores to really develop a good game. I really think that Unreal is overrated. In recent times, we have seen that Unreal is actually becoming kind of this industry standard game development software. And I think Unreal is overrated for that. Unreal Engine has been moving slowly towards filmmaking and visual effects, let's be honest here, and that is making the engine itself more demanding. And it's not going to be a good game development software if it keeps on moving towards this direction. With that said, I also think that Unity should be used more. I think Unity is extremely underrated. These days, people are usually moving towards just game development on Unreal. But I think Unity actually has a lot more potential. I mean, look at the game like PUBG Mobile. It's developed on Unity and it's really optimized for almost all mobile devices. Yes, some mobile devices will still struggle, but overall, Unity has a more scalable, range of actually what type of hardware you want to optimize the game for. Because in case of Unreal, you just need the hardware that's the best. You have to get what's the best hardware possible in order to play games on Unreal. While in case of Unity, you can actually scale that hardware requirement a lot more. And I think that is where Unity shines. I think people are focusing way too much on high graphics quality, and I think they should just go for stylized games, or just games that look really different, like Lethal Company, for example. I mean, look at the games like The Walking Dead. They are also very stylized games and people still like them. It's not like they are very high quality graphic games. So with that said, I would like to conclude my video. The reason why I wanted to make this video is because I think Unity is really powerful as an engine. I don't think you have to make a high graphic game. If anything, high graphic games are becoming boring these days. Because let's be honest here, high graphic games are good, but there are so many high graphic games these days that it's kind of becoming boring. You don't need to have a high graphic game. And in case of developing a stylized game, Unity is actually a lot more feature rich in that terms. You can actually develop better 2D games on Unity than Unreal. So I think that is where Unity shines. So with that said, I would like to end my video. I hope you liked the video, and if you have any suggestions, leave them down in the comment below. I hope you have a good one.